Christina, concerns about age mixing. Um, would you like to articulate more of what the concern is?
I mean, I found out about a lot of the democratic, right centric education ideas as of April.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm still very new to a lot of these concepts. However, in my experience working with children in youth groups
Mm-hmm.
in churches,
Mm-hmm.
swim lessons, and
Mm-hmm.
then elementary education and coaching high school, middle school sports,
Mm-hmm.
and then also working now with educators, there seems to still be a line that does naturally occur between the emotional and mental readiness of different groups.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm particularly thinking about how in a swimming class or on the sports field, there already are distinctions about the size and the abilities of
Mm-hmm.
different individuals. And so if I was teaching a swim class for toddlers, I
Mm-hmm.
would not also be able to manage the needs of 6 year olds and 7 year olds
Mm-hmm.
at the same time. And vice versa for also helping, you know, 14 year olds learn how to run and kick the soccer ball and 5 year olds at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder where the idea of age mixing overcomes some of those physical and mental areas that I see.
Yeah, so what I've observed in democratic schools is that the difference is not you're not forcing age mixing either. It's the forcing that's the problem, not the whether things flow out. So, for instance, at the Village Free School, um, the reason they had three different age groups in their they had three different morning meetings every day because the littles would have their morning meeting early, the middles would have it a little bit later, and then the teenagers had it even a little later, so like an hour apart. Because that's how they arrive at school. When you have the complete freedom, one of the things that flows out of that is that they have different kinds of sleep schedules. And so the teenagers aren't very functional at the same time as the six and sevens and eights. And so, yeah, you have this natural outgrowth. So that's the thing is that those exactly the ones you talked about physically. Yes, teaching toddlers to swim, you're not going to mix the teenagers and the toddlers in the swimming unless you're having those teenagers be your assistant, which there's possibility, but you're going to not have everyone doing that. You're going to have a select few who are particularly working well with the kids. So, so I think that that's the question. Is not forcing age mixing in every context. Sex ed is one where, yeah, you're not including those little ones in the same conversation as the bigs. Bigs and littles have to have a different conversation. So the question is not age mixing or not. The question is how does age mixing work when you allow age mixing to be sort of self-selecting, or there's a definite, like sex ed, it's like, yeah, that we're not going to let them self-select that one. There's going to be conversations with a lot of people about who gets to do which one of them. um, and so it may not, the like for instance, the Village Home Education Resource Center, another site where I did my research, um, they have all ages, and but they don't have a context where kids are interacting. They're more like they have a slate of classes, and homeschoolers come and pick classes to participate in. So one of the things they do is that they're like when it comes to things on controversial topics, they will say this is for 10 and up or 14 and up or whatever. They will say this is who this is for. That doesn't mean that whatever they said is a hard and fast rule, because there may be that 9-year-old who's precocious and says no, I want to do that, and they have the conversation with the parents and they say if everyone agrees this is what should happen, then it happens. Exceptions are makeable. And so that's the thing, is how does that arise? Is it an arbitrary bureaucratic random thing, or is it something that is there's a considered reason for it, and then it's negotiable on a case by case basis as well. That's what I'm finding in democratic schools and various kinds of alternatives, is to say it's we may state a limit, but it's also negotiable. And that's so therefore it's the opposite of bureaucratic. So that's you're correct to point out there are differences between different ages of children. That is true. But you can't make bureaucratic assumptions based on age. That doesn't work.
I'd
Go ahead,
like
Stefan.
to just bring a slightly different example to that. So let's say somebody is teaching, let's say intermediate level piano.
Mm,
So you could have children who started playing piano at a very young age, and maybe by about 10 or 12, they're ready to come for this. And somebody who just started as an adult is like in their 20s and coming for this. So for the person who's saying, I'm here to teach intermediate level, I need you to be at this level for me to be able to do this, then you're really saying this is the minimum competence needed to come for this.
right.
And in some cases, for certain things, this could track reasonably well with age, like plus or minus 1 or 2 years. And especially when it's led by an instructor, you tend to have this kind of thing because you have one instructor, many students, and you need to have like where do we pitch this at, right? But when children are doing their own thing, then they are a lot more flexible in terms of a diversity of competences. So if you have, to take a sport that's common in Sri Lanka, a bunch of kids playing cricket,
Hmm.
then the kids who are more experienced will make it easier for the kids who are less experienced because you want it to be fun for everybody.
Right.
And so what is happening and how it's happening is going to determine also whether it makes sense to have a narrow range of competence coming in like that intermediate piano class, or whether it's okay to be mixed. And I think when children have the freedom to vote with their feet, then they're going to stay in the things that work and they're going to leave the things that don't. And then very quickly in a repeated situation, it's going to be obvious that, okay, in this sort of situation, it makes sense to group things this way. In this sort of situation, let's just leave it open and things can just emerge.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the you can look at it as two examples. One is at the Village Free School. As I said, they have these three different age groups, and there was a young woman who was a teenager, but developmentally, emotionally, I guess you'd say, she was hanging out with the littles a lot. Like she would play them all the time. Now she was a young teenager. I think she was only 13. Um, but she was hanging out with the little kids, and that's where that kind of porous boundary and the age mixing really worked for her because she could float between those two groups because in some aspects she's still a 13-year-old, but in other aspects she's more comfortable playing with those little ones because that's just what was working for her. And there was no one in that environment who was saying, "Oh no, you have to be there, not there." Um, so yeah, go ahead, Christina.
I agree that there shouldn't be arbitrary bureaucratic limits to things just for the sake of this makes it easier for us to document, etc. My concern with the age mixing has always come back to the safeguarding of
Hmm.
children. And, working in international schools, there's a lot of documentation that if you are going to work with this age group, you need to have documented degrees and certifications that you know how to do CPR on that size of child.
Hmm.
And if they have special needs or special rights that need to be taken into account, you are, as a practitioner, able to actually manage that situation. And they're not just coming in and out and flowing through the space. And particularly, I'm thinking about how in an age mixed group, there could be differences of size and awareness of size. I'm thinking about middle school students who aren't aware that their limbs are stretching and bumping into things all the time, and also the size of the classroom with
Hmm.
student seats that I couldn't fit into when I was the adult teacher. I would sit on the ground instead, sitting next to them. So there are some management elements, but I'm mostly concerned on just like what happens in that piano class that Safan is bringing up If, the older participant is not aware of their body or not aware of protecting the safety of the other children in the class.
One of the things to notice, Christina, is the context in which those things arise. So one of the things I've noticed, so let me give you the example, which I was going to bring up anyway. Um, so one of the jobs I had before I had done my own stuff was I was the after school, uh, I was running or a teacher in an after school program at a Catholic school. And then later I went on to do stuff at the Village Free School. But at the Catholic school, so this is a K-8, and so after school they would play kickball, and the older kids who were usually we didn't really have very many eighth graders, but we had a lot of sixth graders because that's kind of there seems to be the point at which they transition to being not needing aftercare, I guess, in that community. But one of the things the sixth graders did was they insisted on certain rules that gave them advantages. And so they and of course the little kids look up to the big kids, and so they will play by those rules and do their best, but of course they break down to tears eventually, like we get really frustrated, all kinds of things happen. In contrast, when I went to the Village Free School, um, one of the games that became very popular for them was Foursquare. And like everybody in the school wanted to play Foursquare at the same time, and it became very inconvenient to have these really long lines to play Foursquare. So one of the things they did was they started making 5 square and 6 square. They actually got up to 9 square. So they had 9 squares with people in it, and because it is completely age mixed all the way to 18 there, actually even 19 sometimes, um, the older kids had obvious advantages. But then what they would do is to ensure that an 18-year-old could play with a 6-year-old or 5-year-old, they would change the rules and give the littles advantages. Because for them, the context in which they operate is that everyone should be having fun. And that's not a rule at their school. That's just the way the culture of the place developed in the context of the freedom to choose and to opt out and to really have a lot of choice in that environment. So what I observed is that in the Catholic school, advantage was not something you ever gave up. You maintained advantage. But in the free school, thing was, well, that's dumb. You're just going to make little kids cry. And when you have a conflict resolution process that's robust, which they did at the Village Free School, those kids, if you're making kids cry, either the little kids themselves or the people who notice that are going to write you up and call you on it. Because that's what a conflict resolution process enables, is if something's going wrong and bad for somebody, it doesn't necessarily even have to be the person, but somebody who's uncomfortable with that can call it out. Now, it doesn't mean they're going to get their opinion. It's not like having the power to punish other people arbitrarily. And that's what schools give teachers a lot of times. Because instead of having a conflict resolution process, they just give teachers all the power. And then that's why you get a lot of passengers in those kinds of schools, because it's like, why should I do anything? They're not going to take my point of view seriously. So that's where context is really, really important, is the context in which everyone's voice is, and somebody pointed out in the chat, voice choice, I forget what the other piece was, but those things are crucially important because that's how it really actually works out. And you should have a culture in which people are taking care of each other. So to me, that's a difference there. Go ahead, Henning.
I want to point out, I'm not sure if you are concerned about age mixing because of power abuse situations. It sounded a little bit like this, that older children can use their power. I think child protection is very important. It's very important in every institution where children are, regardless if it's a democratic school or a state school or a church group. And I think that democratic schools should be concerned about child protection. And it's not enough what democratic schools are doing if they are just saying, well, the children can go to the school court and in any way they can go away and they can just, I don't know, these principles I wrote down, choice, voice, exit. These principles
Excellent.
are ingrained in a concept of a democratic school. However, it's not enough. You need to do more to have effective child protection. It's what I learned in my school.
Mm.
It's very important. I think democratic schools should pay more attention to child protection than they are doing right now.
Mm. Do you have like what's an example of something beyond that would be done?
Yes. For example, child protection has several aspects. For example, it can be that children are not very well treated in their own home.
Mm.
And
Right.
if we, as staff members of a democratic school, are suspicious about what's going on in their home, we have a duty to act.
Mm.
But also within our school, there are sometimes situations where power is abused by someone in some way, and the mechanisms the democratic schools all rely on, the school court, doesn't work.
Right.
And in that situation, you need to have some different procedures to make sure that you can guarantee child protection.
Hmm.
One example is if there's something happening between students. Maybe it's we had a case. Actually, we had a case, an older boy and a younger girl, and there happened
Hmm.
something. They were just roughhousing, and
Hmm.
something happened which was not okay. We didn't really knew
Hmm.
if it was accidentally or if the
Right.
boy did it on purpose. But I don't know how to say it in English.
Mm.
The trousers of the girl came down a little bit.
Mm.
That's more or less a situation which happened in this roughhousing situation. Now, if this girl shows oh, what's the word in English? Let me
So,
see. If in such a situation something happens like shame, if
yeah.
the girl feels ashamed, then she probably won't dare to go to the school court because the school court is more or less public.
Yep.
So people are talking publicly about what happened, and there's a rule which was broken. And in most cases, it's okay that it's public. And in some cases, the school court could even send out the bystanders and just say, "We want to talk only with the two people who are concerned."
Mm.
But there are some cases where shame prevents people to seek help uh, at least if it's only this public judicial
Right.
committee or how it's called. So and you need some different procedures to help those who can't use the public procedures, and
Right.
that's child protection. And I think most democratic schools don't think about it enough.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the things that Village Free School ran into as well. There's in Oregon, there are legal requirements around certain employee issues that you cannot hand to a student group. So you have to deal with certain things and issues around violations around sexuality also fall clearly within that uh, that realm. So yes, there definitely needs to be another level of process and understanding to go beyond just that public forum, just for exactly the issues you mentioned. Yeah, and they do exist well, at least in the schools that I've had occasion to find out about their deeper processes. But I don't know whether that exists everywhere, and so maybe you're right. Um,
was going to say thank you, Henning, for bringing that up. And I think it happens in a lot of youth organizations as well. I think about church groups and
mhm.
after school activities. There can be a parent who is the facilitator and doesn't necessarily have the training to understand what marks to look for, what movements to look for, to notice if a child has signs of abuse or signs of even neglect. And I think that's another area where all schools around the world can continue to contribute to this amazing center of knowledge, because democratic schools bring in a lot of great ideas. And I think Stefan's organization has a new quantitative assurance system that he's been rolling out. But even making that more robust and including aspects that, international schools go through lawsuits all the
Yeah.
time for even just mischaracterizations of different individuals, or breaking local traditional rules, that the school is a host of all these multicultural students and doesn't know that having no option for halal food at an organized event is actually breaking local customs. So they get in trouble for that.
Yep.
So there's always stuff we can learn from each other.
Yeah.
Right on. Yeah, so I think your concern, Christina, is well founded, as we've kind of pointed out. But I think that there is contextual factors, like I was bringing up the Catholic school to say that some of that is like, I mean, even the idea of that you're breaking local customs and that you're really having a way to surface those things is the crucial thing. Is how is the feedback loop operating? And what I think the one of the main cultural assumptions that has been made in the dominant culture has been it doesn't matter. It's the assumption that my values are universal. And therefore I can do anything and it's all going to be okay. That's one of the things that what the democratic schools I think are doing well is saying, oh, how do we have voice choice, exit? How do we have these options? What are the structures we need in place? And that's where having the diversity of those kinds of schools is really important, because people are finding different ways to meet those needs. And one of the realities of the democratic school movement is that the consequence of not doing those properly is usually the death of the school. It's been an evolutionary process, is the schools that fail at those tasks that you're pointing out are the ones that fail to succeed. They fail to continue because either lawsuits or political division within the school itself. There's a variety of reasons why um, so many hundreds of schools that tried to replicate Summerhill, for instance, cease to exist. There's only a handful left. And it's because the realities of taking care of other people's children is one that is harsh when you get it wrong. And unfortunately for us, there's structural reasons why the democratic schools aren't aren't they are on the rise, I believe, but they aren't in the common conversation, aren't in the mainstream conversation, and I think that has to do with other things which I've talked about in other contexts. Um, is I think, but we need to be robustly thinking about and putting into place like the kinds of structures that Henning's talking about, is making sure that we have a robust set of structures to offer when the opportunity arises, because when the shift happens, which it will, I'm confident, it's going to be a shift to wait, when the mainstream actually catches on and says, oh, we need to do things differently, they're going to need existing examples to rely on. And that's where the work we're doing now is crucially important, because it's what my friend Sharif calls the parallel polis, is you have to have these alternatives
Ah,
bubbling and in nearby, so that when the monolith collapses, it rises in its place. And his example of that, pardon me, is the reason that Czechoslovakia had a velvet revolution as opposed to the rest of Eastern Europe when the Berlin Wall fell is because they had something ready to go. They had decades before, well, in the 70s, a bunch of imprisoned people imprisoned by the Russians for being outspoken had actually formed the Constitution in secret, passing notes in a prison, um, which included Václav Havel, who became president. They were passing they wrote a constitution long before the need for that constitution. I mean, the need was always there before the opportunity arose to implement it. But that's why they were able to do something that was, not the violence that occurred all around them because they had something ready to go. And so I think that's where we're at now is we're bubbling and percolating those ideas. And right now, the schools that are really lasting are ones that are having to overcome the hardest conditions, lack of public funding. In America, it's a very litigious society where if you mess up, your organization's going to disappear. There's a school here in Oregon that was shut down for that kind of reason. And so right now, the conditions for success are so harsh that it's really remarkable that democratic schools are succeeding the way they are. And then when the opportunity comes, they'll be ready to fill the void that will come. I don't know what that void will look like, and I don't know who will be ready to fill it, but supporting that movement is really important to having it be ready. So, all right. Thank you all very much. The few remaining.
Yeah. Now, my whole day, actually, my whole week is like bouncing between the international schools mainstream conversations that are happening
Yep.
and then all of the Learning Planet stuff. So I'm like living in two different worlds and trying to synthesize it all.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, that's an important role to play, by the way, is bridging the worlds is one of those things where I think one of the ways that when the mainstream collapses, it's bridgers like yourself who are going to be able to say into that space, hey, wait a minute, there's other options, there's other ways. And so I think that's a really important role to play. And that's why, a lot of like Joyce and I are going to a lot of different conferences. We found that totally mainstream is not really edifying yet. But we're on a lot of these kind of marginal ones. In fact, we're going to be in Malta, next week? For a conference that's it's EU focused, but it's going to be what I assume will be a lot of mainstream people, but it's called Seen and Heard, and it's all about voice for students. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens. In fact, the reason I know about it is because Michael in Germany told me about it, and so I didn't know. So he actually I guess his proposal didn't get accepted, but so I don't know if he'll be there or not. Oh, maybe he'll be there. That'd be great if he was. It'd be good to see him. But we're
Yeah,
going.
it's all part of that two loops model, right? Like we got to be ready to take over for the collapse, hospice it into the archives.
Exactly.